If you were completely honest with yourself right now, no excuses, no blaming circumstances, no pretending, would you be satisfied with how you're living, not your potential, not your intentions, not what you could become, your actual daily behavior? Because here's the uncomfortable truth: most people don't have a motivation problem, they have an honesty problem. And until you fix that, nothing changes. Radical self honesty is the starting line of real change because it forces you to confront the gap between who you say you are and how you actually live. Most people don't struggle because they lack information. They struggle because they avoid accurate self assessment. It's easier to protect your ego than to evaluate your behavior. It's easier to blame circumstances than to measure your own effort. But growth does not begin with motivation, inspiration, or planning. It begins with truth. Brutally clear, emotionally uncomfortable truth. When you remove exaggeration and excuses, you see patterns. The inconsistency, the procrastination, the rationalizations you repeat so often, they feel justified. Radical self-honesty means looking at your habits without softening the edges. It means admitting that your results are largely a reflection of your daily standards, not your intentions. This kind of honesty requires emotional maturity because it strips away the comfort of self-deception. You may realize that you're not as disciplined as you claim, not as focused as you believe, not as committed as you present yourself to others. That realization can feel heavy, even discouraging, but it is actually empowering. When you tell the truth about your current condition, you gain a clear starting point. You stop building goals on fantasy and start building them on facts. Instead of saying, "I work hard," you measure how many uninterrupted hours you actually produce. Instead of saying, "I eat well," you look at what you consume across a full week. Instead of saying, "I'm trying," you examine whether your actions match the level of effort required. Radical self-honesty also demands that you separate identity from behavior. Admitting that you lack discipline in certain areas does not mean you are incapable. It means you are accurately assessing where improvement is required. This distinction matters because shame paralyzes, but clarity mobilizes. When you own your weaknesses without dramatizing them, you create space for structured improvement. You begin to see feedback as information instead of personal attack. You track your habits with precision instead of relying on memory, which often flatters you. Over time, this level of truth-based self-evaluation builds credibility with yourself. You stop making promises you won't keep. You stop overestimating tomorrow's effort. You start respecting reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. Discipline over emotion means choosing standards over moods, commitments over impulses, and long-term direction over short-term comfort. Emotions are real and powerful, but they are also unstable. They rise and fall based on sleep, stress, environment, and even small inconveniences. If your actions are determined by how you feel in the moment, your progress will always be inconsistent. One day you feel motivated and productive, the next day you feel distracted or tired, and everything slows down. This emotional volatility becomes the hidden reason your goals remain unfinished. Discipline interrupts that cycle. It creates a structure that does not depend on whether you feel inspired, confident, or energized. It replaces emotional decision-making with predetermined standards. You decide in advance what you will do, and then you execute regardless of mood. Most people misunderstand discipline as intensity or aggression, but real discipline is quiet and controlled. It is waking up at the same time even when sleep feels more comfortable. It is training when your body prefers rest. It is staying focused on a task when distraction is easier. These decisions are rarely dramatic. They are small acts of self-command repeated daily. Over time, those repetitions form identity. When you consistently act according to your standards instead of your emotions, you begin to see yourself as reliable. That reliability builds confidence in a grounded way, not because you feel unstoppable, but because you have evidence that you follow through. Choosing discipline over emotion also strengthens mental resilience. When you act only when you feel ready, you teach your brain to avoid discomfort. When you act despite discomfort, you expand your tolerance for effort. You learn that fatigue does not mean stop, boredom does not mean quit, and frustration does not mean failure. This shift is critical for long-term growth. Every meaningful goal requires sustained effort beyond the initial excitement. The early stages are often fueled by enthusiasm, but the middle stages demand consistency without applause or visible results. Discipline carries you through that middle. It stabilizes your behavior when emotions fluctuate, allowing progress to continue quietly in the background. The more you practice this, the less power temporary feelings have over your direction, and the more control you gain over the trajectory of your life. Resilience is built through ownership because strength develops when you stop searching for external explanations and start examining your own responses. Difficulties are part of every life: setbacks in career, health challenges, financial strain, broken plans, unexpected obstacles. What separates resilient individuals from stagnant ones is not the absence of hardship, but the refusal to surrender responsibility. Ownership means asking, "What is within my control here?" instead of, "Who is responsible for this happening to me?" That shift is subtle but powerful. When you blame circumstances, you temporarily protect your ego, but you also surrender your influence. When you take ownership, even in imperfect or unfair situations, you reclaim your ability to respond strategically. Resilience grows in that space between reality and reaction. Ownership forces you to evaluate your standards honestly. If a project fails, resilience is not built by labeling it bad luck and moving on unchanged. It is built by reviewing preparation, focus, execution, and consistency. If your health declines, resilience is not strengthened by saying life is busy. It is strengthened by examining sleep, nutrition, stress management, and discipline. This level of responsibility can feel heavy because it removes comforting narratives, yet it also removes helplessness. Once you accept that your response plays a central role in your outcomes, you gain leverage. Even when external factors are beyond your control, your habits, preparation, and decision-making remain adjustable variables. Resilience also develops through repeated exposure to accountability. Each time you admit a mistake without defensiveness, you train yourself to tolerate discomfort. Each time you correct behavior instead of rationalizing it, you reinforce self-trust. Over time, this builds psychological durability. Challenges no longer feel like personal attacks. They become information. Setbacks stop defining your identity and start shaping your strategy. Ownership prevents emotional spirals because you focus on solutions instead of narratives. Instead of asking why this happened to you, you ask what you will do next. That forward movement, even when slow, builds confidence rooted in action rather than optimism. The more consistently you practice ownership, the less fragile you become. Criticism becomes data. Failure becomes feedback. Pressure becomes a test of preparation. You stop waiting for conditions to improve and start improving yourself within existing conditions. That is how resilience becomes a trained capacity rather than a personality trait. Physical and mental self-control shape identity because repeated behavior defines who you become more than intention ever will. You are not the person you plan to be. You are the person your habits reveal. The way you manage your body, what you eat, how you sleep, how consistently you train, how you handle fatigue, directly influences the way you manage your mind. When physical standards are loose, mental discipline tends to follow the same pattern. When you consistently override impulses in small physical decisions, you strengthen the same neural pathways required for focus, patience, and restraint in larger areas of life. Self-control is not a personality trait you either possess or lack. It is a skill developed through repetition. Every time you choose preparation over indulgence, structure over chaos, and effort over comfort, you reinforce an identity built on control rather than reaction. Physical self-control creates visible structure. Waking at a fixed time, following a training schedule, preparing meals intentionally, limiting distractions, these actions may appear simple, but they establish order. That order reduces decision fatigue and limits emotional fluctuation. When your body operates within disciplined parameters, your mind has fewer variables to manage. Energy stabilizes, focus improves, confidence becomes evidence-based rather than imagined. You trust yourself because you observe consistency. In contrast, when physical habits are inconsistent, identity becomes unstable. You feel productive some days and scattered on others. You promise discipline, but negotiate with temptation. That internal contradiction weakens self-perception over time. Mental self-control deepens this structure. It shows up in the ability to concentrate on a demanding task without constant stimulation. It appears in measured responses instead of impulsive reactions. It is visible when you delay gratification to complete meaningful work. Mental restraint requires conscious awareness of impulses and the willingness to override them. This practice strengthens attention, patience, and emotional regulation. The more often you redirect your focus deliberately, the less control distractions have over you. The more consistently you manage your internal dialogue, the less external pressure dictates your behavior. Identity forms at the intersection of physical and mental discipline. When your actions repeatedly reflect restraint, follow through, and consistency, you stop identifying as someone who tries and start identifying as someone who executes. That shift influences every domain: career, relationships, health, and long term goals. Self control compounds quietly, shaping not only what you achieve, but how you see yourself under pressure. Consistency beats intensity because progress is the result of repeated, controlled effort, not occasional bursts of extreme action. Intensity feels powerful in the moment. It creates excitement, urgency, and the illusion of rapid transformation. You start a new routine with aggressive energy, push yourself to extremes, and declare that this time will be different. For a few days or weeks, you operate at a high level. Then reality returns. Fatigue sets in, responsibilities accumulate, motivation declines, the intensity fades, and with it, the progress. This cycle repeats itself until frustration replaces confidence. The problem was never a lack of effort, it was the lack of sustainability. Consistency, by contrast, is structured, measured, and realistic. It does not depend on emotional peaks. It depends on daily execution that can be maintained regardless of circumstances. Consistency requires humility because it often feels unimpressive. Small improvements in strength, focus, savings, or skill development rarely produce immediate recognition. There is no dramatic shift, no instant validation. Instead, there is repetition. The same workout schedule followed week after week, the same focused work blocks completed day after day, the same budgeting discipline practiced month after month. This repetition may seem ordinary, but it creates momentum that compounds. When you show up consistently, you remove the start and stop pattern that wastes time and energy. You build rhythm, and rhythm reduces resistance. Tasks become automatic rather than negotiable. Intensity often prioritizes short-term results, while consistency prioritizes identity. When you commit to daily standards, you are not chasing dramatic change. You are reinforcing who you are becoming. Each consistent action strengthens self-trust. You begin to rely on your behavior rather than your feelings. That reliability reduces internal conflict because decisions are already made. You do not ask whether you will train, focus, or prepare. You simply follow the established routine. Over months and years, these stable actions produce results that far exceed what temporary intensity could achieve. The steady accumulation of effort outperforms emotional surges because it survives fatigue, distraction, and external pressure. When consistency becomes your default, progress becomes predictable rather than accidental. Truth creates long-term freedom because it aligns your decisions with reality instead of illusion. When you distort facts to protect your ego or avoid discomfort, you may feel temporary relief, but you build your life on unstable ground. Denial delays consequences. It does not eliminate them. Financial overspending justified as reward. Declining health dismissed as just stress. Unfinished goals explained away as bad timing. These small distortions accumulate quietly. Over time, they limit options, reduce confidence, and narrow opportunity. Truth interrupts that pattern. It forces you to acknowledge where you stand without exaggeration or minimization. This clarity can feel uncomfortable at first because it removes the protective layer of excuses, but it also restores control. When you see your situation accurately, you can respond intelligently rather than emotionally. Long-term freedom is not the absence of responsibility. It is the result of disciplined responsibility. When you tell the truth about your habits, you stop wasting energy maintaining false narratives. You no longer need to defend poor decisions or rationalize inconsistency. That mental clarity frees attention and focus for productive effort. Instead of managing appearances, you manage performance. Instead of projecting confidence, you build it through measurable progress. Truth simplifies life because it reduces internal conflict. There is no gap between what you claim and what you practice. This alignment strengthens integrity, and integrity builds trust, both with others and with yourself. Truth also sharpens decision-making. When you accurately assess your strengths and weaknesses, you set realistic goals. You stop chasing outcomes that conflict with your current level of preparation. You recognize where skill development is required and where discipline must improve. This realism prevents wasted years pursuing directions unsupported by action. It channels energy into areas where growth is possible through effort and structure. Over time, this honest evaluation compounds into competence. Competence creates options. Options create flexibility. Flexibility is a form of freedom earned through responsibility. The earlier you confront truth, the less severe future corrections need to be. Small adjustments made today prevent large crises later. Honest reflection becomes a preventive discipline rather than a reactive one. You develop the habit of regular self-assessment, course correction, and measurable improvement. That pattern reduces regret because you are constantly realigning with reality instead of drifting away from it. If you take nothing else from this, take responsibility for telling yourself the truth, not the convenient version, not the version that protects your pride, the accurate version. Your habits are either building your future or quietly limiting it. Your standards are either rising or lowering. Your discipline is either strengthening or weakening. There is no neutral position. Real change does not require dramatic announcements. It requires daily alignment between what you know and what you do. It requires physical restraint when impulses are loud. It requires mental control when distractions compete for your attention. It requires consistency when progress feels slow. Most of all, it requires honesty when it would be easier to rationalize. You are not stuck because life is uniquely against you. You are stuck where you tolerate inconsistency, where you avoid responsibility, and where you soften the truth. The moment you remove those patterns, momentum shifts. Heading into 2026, make one commitment. No more self-deception. Measure your effort, track your habits, correct your weaknesses, raise your standards. Do the work whether you feel like it or not. Freedom is built through discipline. Confidence is built through proof. Growth is built through truth. Be accurate with yourself, be disciplined in your actions, be consistent in your standards, and let your results speak for you.